behind the facts.
The Lagos State High Court has convicted, suspended the Chicago certificate story. It's never going away, is it? Show with stories for the day.
You hear diverse voices and opinions.
And she was meeting her friend with her husband, knowing that.
You should not feel happy because there is nothing to happy about.
Yeah, it's quite pathetic the way the country is going.
We distinguish each story accurately with analysis.
It's Hard Facts with Marianne Okon on 99.3 Nigeria Info. They talk and you talk. This is Nigeria Info.
If you say no weapon fashion against me shall prosper, what about the way we are fashion against ourselves?
The campaign is over. I still wonder why we keep hearing they are coming. We are about to do this and that.
The devil wants us to say that God is not good. The crisis we are in now is economic persecution.
In fact, recording it and putting it on the social media is very good for him. It's a good evidence for him.
We've got to bring the green back into our nation. There's a reason why Nigeria's flag is green.
99.3, your station for talk. Let's talk.
It's still the nation's number one talk news and sports radio station, 99.3 Nigeria Info. 6 minutes gone past the 5 o'clock hour. Welcoming you to Balogun and Broad. And today we're going to be talking about the Africa Free Trade Zone. Not just that, but the push by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria for a unified currency across the continent. And like I said earlier on, I think about so many disastrous things that have happened the last time someone tried to create a unified currency. But I'm not one given to conspiracy theories, so I'm going to let my guest do justice to this conversation. And my guest is, let me give you some background to my guest quickly, and then, of course, we'll go into this conversation proper. For those of you who do not know, on Balogun and Broad, we talk about everything that has to do with business, the economy, not just that of Nigeria, but, of course, of the continent and, of course, other parts of the world. My guest is Ibrahim Anoba. He is the editor, African Liberty, and he's joining me via Zoom. Ibrahim, it's so good to have you join us, but I have a very funny, quick question. Why does your Ibrahim have to be a small I?
That's very interesting. Can you hear me, Anna?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
It's quite an interesting decision I made, I think, about a year ago. Because, I'm very African. And, Africans, we are fond of giving names to our kids based on our religious values. And sometimes you don't, I believe you can be a Muslim or Christian without necessarily giving your children Arab or Jewish names. So I deliberately silenced the I, so to emphasize my Babatunde, which is my African name. So I prefer to be called Babatunde.
Okay, so Babatunde Anoba, you like it?
Preferably. Thank you.
Okay, so let's just go straight into the business, because many people have totally actually forgotten about the African trade, agreement that African countries made. Maybe not necessarily forgotten, but it has been overtaken by events, and people are not necessarily pointing or making it front and center of conversations. So because you're here, I want you to do a refresher. Let's do a quick refresher as to why the Africa Trade, the AFCFTA. Oh my God, it's a tongue twister. Yes, tell us. Yes, AFCFTA. Yes, why it is important to us as Africans, especially Nigerians. Let's start from there.
Well, thank you, Marianne. I'm very aware our audience might not necessarily be people who are actually savvy with all this abbreviations of what macroeconomic is. So to keep it simple, this is an agreement that's supposed to integrate the continent in terms of trading. So if you are someone who have parents or siblings that go to the Benin Republic or Ghana to trade frequently or to buy materials to trade in Balogun market or somewhere in Asaba, it means that your cousin or your parents would now, under this new rule, be able to, if things work perfectly, they will be able to go to Benin or Ghana, not bothered about carrying dollar or naira to go exchange. It means that they probably have a single currency that they can use across this country. And second, it means that when they're crossing the border from Benin to Nigeria, they won't have to deal with or pay heavy custom duties. It means that you will be able to buy products, come into your country and sell without necessarily having to spend most of what you should be earning on paying border agents or settling the dollar difference. So to keep it simple, that is one of the things that the AFCFTA aims to achieve. And this is something that has been in place since 2018. And this is the year where countries are actually planning to bring it into force.
Now, we know that sometime in April, we commenced formal exports of locally produced commodities to South Africa, to Rwanda, Cameroon, Kenya, under the Guided Trade Initiative of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And on July in 2019, we signed that agreement. Do you think that, as we have, many other countries are honoring that agreement? And what could be the impediments, in fact? Because realistically, we're talking about inflation everywhere in the world. Whether you go to England, there's inflation. How they're cushioning the effects is different from how we're dealing with it. I don't even know if we're dealing with it here. But then, have most African countries necessarily adhered to the Africa Trade Act? And what are the very obvious impediments that we're having to deal with today, which is also more like a spanner in the wheel of things?
Absolutely. You see, Marianne, when this thing came into deliberation in 2018, countries, even Nigeria, was very lethargic in agreeing. Like, come on, we already have good trade relations with countries across the world. Why do we need this so-called intra-Africa trade? Why do you need to tell me, as Nigeria, I need to prioritize trading with Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire than, say, trading with the UK? But with the Russia-Ukraine problem and even the pandemic, and recently the fluctuation in the dollar rather, all these three things combined have made countries like Nigeria aware that we cannot keep having our economy more tied to countries that are far, far away from us. So that whenever something happens between Ukraine and Russia, it's going to affect the price of bread in Lagos. Or to say whenever Palestine and Israel get into war, it's going to affect petroleum prices or the price of certain products. So that vulnerability of our economy to shocks from countries far away from us is one of the reasons why African countries like Nigeria are now seeing the need to go back to that 2018 agreement, the AFCFTA, and look at ways to prioritize trading among African countries. You'll be surprised to know, Marianne, that African countries trading within themselves today stands at about 3%. Imagine, Nigeria trades more with the Netherlands, Spain. In fact, in the top 10 countries, top 10 list of countries that gets more product from Nigeria, our top exporting destinations, only the Cote d'Ivoire is the African country on that list. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
But when you go to this, majority of them are the European countries, except for the US. But when you go to these European countries, averagely about 60% of their trade happens within the EU, happens within Europe. In fact, I think Luxembourg's trade or exports, about 81% of it is within Europe, which means that if anything happens within the EU, Luxembourg has priorities to make sure those things are settled quickly because it affects the trade. But imagine if Luxembourg's trade is 80% involved in Nigeria. I don't think it will be as easy for that country to manage its economy if something's going on in Nigeria. So these are some of the reasons why African countries nowadays are looking at how to trade within the continent, just like the EU, just like North American countries or even Southern American countries. It just seems as though African countries are the only sets of countries who prioritize trading with other countries and rather than trading with their own brothers and sisters. And that comes with a lot of problems.
Lovely. I like that you brought up this issue because I'm one of those people. I'm just realizing now that I'm one of those proponents of Africa doing business with itself more. Because 2-3 weeks ago, I had a Ugandan activist on my show who put up a video saying maybe it's time that Africa shuts its doors to everyone else and have a family meeting of sorts where we can begin to act like China, grow ourselves to a point where we don't necessarily need the rest of the world, that they will now start needing us like China did, like Singapore did. But I've also talking about trade. you cannot have this safe trade or free flow of trading if you don't talk about transportation. I'll tell you what. One of the reasons why I've not been able to go to my other countries, because the flight route is madness. I could go to America and be back, but I'm still trying to navigate my way just from here to Sierra Leone, that's still here within West Africa. Well, thank goodness for the likes of Air Peace, and I'm not doing advertisement for them, but I think there's now a direct flight to Freetown. But before now, the flight route was just madness. You'd had to go to Guinea, you had to fly to some crazy place and then all the way back. Why are we not dealing with the basics, which is transportation, which is going to be the best and easiest way for Africans to trade? Why is that not front and center in terms of this Africa Trade Act? Why are we not looking at that? Because I've always wondered why flying Africa is so difficult and expensive as opposed to me going to England.
So that's one of the most pertinent questions we keep asking ourselves. So, Marianne, if you recall when Britain first established railway in Nigeria, and in fact in other colonies like India and the Gold Coast, it was for one reason: to facilitate exportation or exploitation of commodities that Britain needs for its own development, which means the introduction of the railway into Africa was, you want to talk about, something like trade. You look at the transportation within the European country. If you've been to the EU before, and you see the ease with which you can move from Carlisle.
Oh, the Eurostar is superb. Yes.
Exactly. And what is the reason for the emergence of the Eurostar? It's because of trade. Primarily, it was because of trade. And there is no way that imagine Nigeria and Nigeria Republic and the Chad having trade relations under this AFCFTA protocol, with massive amount of people moving from Maiduguri to Niamey to Chad to trade granules and gold and what other commodities. There is no way the government will not be compelled, of those three countries, will not be compelled to introduce a very efficient transportation means. In fact, I think the Buhari government was trying to do that at some point, and it's met some criticism from people in the South saying, why would you be spending billions of naira fixing road between Nigeria and Niger, not spending it internally? But the point here is that whenever trade is involved, countries are always compelled to fix infrastructure that has to do with transportation. You see the semi border between Nigeria and the Benin Republic, how chaotic and very eyesore of a place it is. There is no way trade between those countries increases under the AFCFTA, and the government will not do anything about that because the pressure on the road will be so enormous. It will be generating more money for both countries, and they will see the need to make sure that road that connects the Benin Republic and Nigeria is much more pliable because it is in the interest of both countries. So when you talk about the infrastructure deficit in Africa, we've tried to solve this I think since 2005, when the World Bank came with this, I forgot the figure they gave, I think $130 billion that Africa needs to spend annually on infrastructure. We've been dealing with that for over 20 years now. Nothing has concretely happened. With China coming in to give us many of those loans to build railway and whatnot. But with this AFCFTA, if we commit to this, it's going to force our governments to invest in infrastructure.
Then it leaves me with the question, which is obvious. Why are they not committing if this will be the uhuru that we're all searching for? For example, in Nigeria, people keep screaming that government should open the border, let them bring rice, let them flood the markets. What's the thing that's holding our governments back across the continent? Because I'd rather do business with the man in Lome. I'd rather do business with the guy in Kinshasa than do business. With due respect to the guys across, the seas, I'd rather do business with the guy that looks exactly like me, because I can trust what he's selling to me. I can trust the soil from which it comes from, especially now that we're having to deal with genetically modified foods and all kinds of things coming into the shores of this country from Asia and the rest of the world. Why and what is it that is stopping us from, committing?
So this is actually multifaceted. If you recall recently, the whole noise going on across the former French colonies of Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, with the coups and whatnot. Remember, one of the key things people were arguing again was this, we need to free ourselves from France. We don't need the French economic zone anymore. It's not easy for those countries. It hasn't been easy for them to commit to some of the dictates of the AFCFTA. One of the key dictates is that countries in Africa that are signatories to the AFCFTA must, by I think 2028 or 35, commit to a single currency. Now, if you tell that to Mali or Guinea or Burkina Faso 2 years ago, they will tell you, well, we have the French, is it FAC? The French community currency.
Yes.
CFA.
Yes.
The CFA.
Yes.
So for those countries, it's ordinarily not easy. They had to, first of all, make themselves do away with France, then look internally and then commit to something like the Afro or the Afric, this so-called, African currency. So there is a reason like that. Then secondly is that part of the AFCFTA's dictate is that we understand that many African countries are on different economic trajectories. Of course, you cannot compare the economic strength of Nigeria to, say, countries like Chad, even though both countries are like neighbors. Nigeria is in a better place than Chad to, say, commit to 90% reduction in tariff. Chad, for example, needs those tariffs to say if you are bringing goods into Chad, you have to pay X and Y amount of money. Chad doesn't have the luxury of canceling that tariff compared to Nigeria because it has more urgency in contrast to us.
Yeah.
So the disparity in terms of the economic position of different African countries has also influenced the ways they've come into table and say, okay, I'm ready to do this. And I think the last one is, which people often underplay, is the influence of the European Union and the so-called Western countries. Because if Nigeria exports most of its crude oil and gold and fertilizers to the Netherlands and Spain and the US, those countries wouldn't want Nigeria to stop, and they want Nigeria to keep exporting those things to them because it comes at a cheaper rate. So they have some influence to play, and telling your ministers that don't agree to these things yet, or convincing them that we can give you much more benefit for your exports, and I mean that will convince African countries not to sign up to the AFCFTA already. So these are some of the reasons why it has been kind of lethargic in the last is it 5 years now?
The African Union is on the one hand, and we have the ECOWAS on the other hand. Well, the ECOWAS has come up with the passports, which is, we can say, well, yeah, if you hold the ECOWAS passport, you don't need a visa to go to certain places, but that's a start. And I'm looking here right in front of me the benefits of trade-offs for ratifying the AFCFTA. And one of the things that interests me is the fact that this will strengthen Africa's economic and commercial diplomacy, which is something that we've been looking forward to, being respected among the Committee of States. But the fact is that we keep going cap in hand to all these other countries. Our houses are not in order. Just as you've said, most of these countries are so crippled because of maybe their commitments to other countries also in the West. So how do we even begin to start cleaning house to a point where we can say, okay, as countries, we've done our homework at home. Now we're back on the table to push this further. Do you see that happening anytime soon, or should we go and start praying?
I mean, it's already happened in several cases. There was a meeting in Abuja, I think was it last month, about the digital component of this, payments under the AFCFTA. And the Manufacturer Association of Nigeria's president, I think that's Mr. Francis Meshioye, came out and was crying to the federal government that this is the time where we need to actually start implementing many of the protocols under the AFCFTA because it affects manufacturers. And if you also cast your mind back to 2-3 months ago when Uganda was about to pass the anti-LGBT law, and there was this whole noise from the US saying that, if you pass this, we will punish you. How is America going to punish Uganda? It's
a sovereign country. Why?
Yeah. But it was based on one agreement. It's called AGOA. That was an agreement that's pretty much like the AFCFTA, but it's between the US and certain countries considered, economically weak like Uganda. It means that Uganda manufacturers could export to the US, and American manufacturers could import or export to Uganda without tariffs. And the Ugandan government
let's take a break. When we come back, just give me a second. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about this. Stay with us. It's still Balogun and Broad, 99.3 Nigeria Info. 5 minutes gone past the 5 o'clock hour. It's still Balogun and Broad on Hard Facts. 99.3 Nigeria Info is the station. We're broadcasting live from our audio-visual studios right here in Itimi and Crescent, Victoria Island, Lagos. And my guest is still here with us. Yes, we're still talking about the Africa trade. I love the ideas that come with this whole, Africa trade. But then I'm still stuck up where we're very quick to append our signatures to these, treaties and but then when it comes to actionable plans and working in tandem with all of the benefits that come with these things, we slack. But then it doesn't mean that we do not have our problems. Like my guest said, Africa has so many problems, so many challenges, and these might be some of the reasons why it's difficult for these countries to actually adhere. My guest is Ibrahim Anoba. He's the editor of African Liberty. Ibrahim, before we went on that break, you were trying to obviously talk about some of the challenges that we faced as a continent and travel, transportation, and trust, between African countries to do business. But you were talking about Zimbabwe and, assuming, AFC, I will never be able to say it in one breath, but pardon me. AFCFTA. I got it.
There you go.
I got it. All right. I know that a lot of people have questions. We'll get to the point where we're going to open up the phone line so that people can ask those questions. But I want to ask one quick question. And you didn't answer me when I did ask. How soon do you think that African countries will rally around the AFCFTA? Even though some people are making moves, how soon do you think the rest of Africa can play catch up? I mean, and I'm not just talking about here. I'm talking about as far as Madagascar.
I mean, you're absolutely right. So there is the appetite there. As I said earlier, with all this fluctuations in the dollar rate in some West African countries. I mean, you can see Ghana going through its own economic ordeal right now. Zimbabwe has been going through its own, trying to change currency several times. The Northern African countries are also, facing this whole sanction fear in terms of what's going on in Israel and between Israel and Palestine. So there are all these things going on that are pushing our leaders to now look at what they agreed to in 2018 and 2022, which is one of the reasons why the African Union, I think, that launched this thing called the Guide Initiative, which is pretty much like a workbook or a map, a roadmap for African countries struggling to adhere or commit to the AFCFTA's dictates, to guide them in their implementation. And that's part of the reasons why there was that meeting last month in Abuja. And with this new interest and the push by the African Union, I think the one thing that could be missing is the will of the people themselves, Africans. We that are petty traders, small and medium enterprises, you that do business on Instagram, sell your products to your cousins or your friends in Ghana or Sierra Leone, is the time for our people to rally around their lawmakers and push them to put this agreements into action, because all said and done, it only benefits us, the people that are at the bottom of the economic chain, not necessarily the big corporations, but people will go to Benin Republic, Madagascar, not even Madagascar, what's it this called? Niger or Chad to trade, not Nigeria. Those are the people that it benefits. So I think the only missing part, as I said earlier, is the people's will to push their lawmakers to make this thing happen.
Oh, you've touched me. When you say the people's will, we want so many things. We're willing to do whatever it takes. But then let's talk about our country, because this is where we know, and this is the politics that we understand the most. Let me even talk about the simplest thing as a local government authority's duty. How many of us know what the duties of the local government is, let alone telling them that they've not done it or they've done it well? We don't know. Just a handful of people know. And so every time we need something, we say we are calling on the governor to. Meanwhile, it's not the governor's job. Same thing that we do with lawmakers. We forget that it's in the name, lawmakers. They're not executive, but we're always pushing for them to do the job of the executive. Same thing for the presidency. We're saying, Mr. President must come and help us with our primary health care. It's not his job. So how do we, yes, we might have the will. Are we channeling it in the right direction? Because that is where we start from. Do we know what these responsibilities are and who can we direct it to in Nigeria?
Yeah, so one of the key things that civil society organizations like mine and several across the country that have been trying to do is to simplify this agreement and the benefits to our people. Because I mean, if you look critically at it, nothing will actually get into motion unless the pressure comes from the people. And this seems to be happening across the rest of the continent. Nigeria just seems to be a different, which means that the argument by Tumba Meshioye last week on behalf of the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, arguments like that, urging the federal government to come into agreement, to commit to implementation. We need those kinds of encouragement, not only from the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, but from normal, regular Nigerians trading in Balogun, Grove Street to Marina, which again goes back to the job of civil society organizations trying to make sure people know that these things are there, these things exist for these people, educate them, and make sure they put that front and center whenever they discuss with their lawmakers. I mean, I grew up in Lagos Island where my parents, my mothers, they trade in Balogun market. They go to Benin Republic to buy. They'll spend like 2-3 days before they come back, and you see the amount of stress that comes with. But again, by the end of the month, you look at the analysis of what they've been able to sell, and you look at the cost. It doesn't really balance because they spend too much money on the border. They spend too much money paying, custom duties and all these other tariffs. These are the things that the AFCFTA wants to eliminate. I mean, tell me if that's not to the benefit of the average Nigerian businesswoman and man. So again, it goes back to education.
I love it when you say civil societies like kiosks, but then many civil societies, I'm sorry, with due respect, are more interested in politics. Last week I was shocked to see a civil society group campaigning for a governor who allegedly stole money, and they're saying the EFCC is witch hunting him. If more civil society organizations like yours were maybe taking on the responsibility of educating us more, maybe we'd have more information and push our lawmakers, our executive members to do these jobs. But that's not happening. So again, I asked that question that I asked before: are we getting closer, or are we going further away?
I mean, we're getting closer. I have to be very optimistic. That is my job. I have to make sure. I have to make sure I keep the people and myself optimistic about the potential of the AFCFTA. But to be quite frank, you're right. Civil society in Africa seems to be very obsessed with politics rather than policy. And if that is the case, then it becomes a challenge because our primary customers are the people, the African people. And you hear, civil societies, they call themselves, business organizations or trade groups, and they're not really doing too much. I think the biggest help in the country has come from, you might not like it, but from the trade unions, from the Labor Congress. These are the people that are making Nigerians particularly are aware of some of their rights, the rights to salary, the right to timely payment. But also now I'm using this medium to encourage the Labor Congress, the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, to see the need in investing in communication with our people. I mean, imagine now, I'm guessing by the end of the month, by the end of May, we're already in May. By the end of May, there'll be significant movements on the side of Nigeria regarding this AFCFTA. Things are already in motion. But guess what, Marianne? What if that agreement or that motion is in place, but people are not aware? So of what benefits? Means that countries who have invested more in communication, like Ghana or maybe the Ivory Coast, will be benefiting more because their own people will be aware that they can come to Nigeria and they won't have to pay custom duties. But our own people will not be aware. So it's time to have the NLC or the TUC or any other labor organization to communicate to our people that this agreement is there. Once it is completely in motion, it is there to benefit them, and they should seize the opportunity.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I want to open up the phone lines because I know that it's part of your job to educate people on the importance of the AFCFTA and why it is important to us all. Because whether we like it or not, we're involved in one trade of goods or services, Even I am trading service, So it's very important to us. But I want to take responses. I want to take calls. I want to take your comments. So join the conversation. We're live on facebook.com/Nigeria Info FM. We're also live on YouTube, Nigeria Info FM. Post your comments and your questions. You can join the conversation 0700 993 993 993. You could also call 0201 465 7190. Ask my guest whatever question that you have in mind. This one says, Andose says, please let your guests know that all the French-speaking countries don't use the franc. That's the CFA. Congo, Guinea, Conakry, Burundi, etc. The French-speaking, but they use their own currencies. Guinea-Bissau and Equatorial Guinea are Portuguese and Spanish-speaking, but they use franc CFA. He also says Africa is home to 54 countries, and only about 14 of them use the franc CFA. So, how they be an impediment to an adoption of a single currency in Africa. I'm sure you're asking how can they be. Okay, he's saying in Africa, South Africa, Algeria, Morocco, etc., they have very strong currencies and they're not keen to adopt any other currency. He says, believe me. He does have a point, right? Because if you look at South Africa has really strong trade relations with several countries. In fact, as we speak, South Africa owns its rights to all that is natural resources, what's in their ground, as opposed to us here where outsiders are mining our gold and taking all kinds of things out of our country. But then crude oil must be shared amongst everybody else, including the government. So let's see if you can add to what he said.
Yeah, so these are fantastic points. First off, on the CFA, of course you're right. Not all these countries have. The majority of them do have their own independent currency, but this is the gag. Their central banks are not independent. They are submissive to the French central bank, and that is the basis of the whole French community problem, or wahala as we call it in Nigeria. Because imagine if with all the things happening in Nigeria right now, if the CBN had no power, I am very sure we'll still be having that volatile rate of dollar exchange. But if your central bank is intertwined with France's central bank, then it becomes a problem. So even if you have your own independent currency, you as a former French colony, majority of them were at some point in the French community zone. And part of the reasons why this AFCFTA push is coming up now is because we are trying to create, I think by 2028, an African central bank that will be able to regulate these currencies and ensure whatever country agree to the AFCFTA protocol, they don't have to bother about France dictating their monetary regulation of fiscal policies.
Okay.
On the question of South Africa and Morocco, so of course South Africa has the right over its own natural resources, but the question we need to ask is, which countries are the biggest exporters or importers of those mining that South Africa is doing? Even though South Africa has its own power over its own mining, majority of them are being sent to Europe. When countries, even within Southern African region, need the same commodities, the same raw materials that South Africa exports, they need those things at cheaper rates. But guess what? We do not have infrastructure in place to ensure those neighboring countries are benefiting. Rather, those natural resources are being exported out of the continent. So these are the things that the AFCFTA comes to correct, prioritizing Africa first.
Well, join the conversation 0700 993 993 993. I have just 2 minutes to take a few more thoughts and comments before I let my guest go. So let me take a quick call and then, of course, I'll let him answer. Hello. Welcome to Hard Facts. Yes.
I greet you and your guest.
Yes.
I like what you just said. I want to tell you something. For example, now, if I say go in my papa house, so one person go say na constitution, go say na inketam. Why is that for a good? It's for that for. If I see God from my house and if somebody says I ain't get them, how much you go about that? Oh, cool. So I go invoke. I tell you, I go invoke.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for calling. Because of time, I'm going to take one quick question on social media and then let you go, Ibrahim, because of time. Let me see on Facebook Live what the comments are. And then I let you go. Okay. Let's see. Ooh. I can't take this comment, but then we don't have time. So I'm just going to say my thank yous, but I'm hoping that you can come back to continue having this conversation, and let's not end on Nigeria Info. The message has to be taken to the people, and of course you work with civil society. People need to understand how important it is for Africa to trade within itself and do it in a seamless manner. And I'm always glad to want to have you back on the show to talk about this. Ibrahim Anoba is the editor of African Liberty, right? Thank you so much. Is that a magazine?
It is an online public advocacy organization. We do publish magazines and articles and go on.
Lovely. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having you talk about Africa trade. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Marianne.
All right, thank you. Well, I still have some information to bring to your disposal. If you want to smell nice in this heat, because once you step out of the house, the heat just hits you.
The heat hits
and for you to smell nice to wherever you're going to, you need something.
And I'm here to introduce the essence of true authenticity in fragrance.
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk. 99.3 Nigeria Info.